Everybody liked Louis Armstrong. He came from a very hard life, and he made it big against all odds. And I just want to highlight a couple things about his life. I'm not going to get into every detail, but maybe some of the unexpected. This is right off the Jewish Journal, and I'm going to point a link to it, but it's mainstream information. I can get it right off of Wikipedia. I'll show you that right now, but I just want to actually highlight a couple things about Louis Armstrong's life and, what influenced him early on, and actually some of the things that happened at a very young age. He would have never chosen this career path if it was not for some things that happened to him at a very young age, and the people that were actually around him and cared for him. And he remembered this. He remembered this all his life. That's undoubtedly true. So Louis Armstrong was born in 1901 on August 4th in a section of New Orleans that was so violent it was called the battlefield. How times have changed? No, not really, right? Isn't that not the fact? New Orleans has always been known as the battlefield, and it is today, actually. And so his father was a day laborer named William Strong. He left his family, and his children rarely saw him. His mother was 16 years old when he had him, and she grew up. He grew up in poverty. So it actually turned out it was the Karnofskys were financially poor, but a very loving family towards Armstrong. They were a Jewish-Russian family. They provided bed, food, and shelter to our Louis, and even included him in the Shabbat dinners. Armstrong had helped the father with his horse and wagon hauling business, delivering coal. And so each day he passed a particular store. He pointed to an old cornet in the window, a cornet he couldn't hope to buy, but longed to play. So one day, Mr. Karnofsky stopped at the store, walked in and came out with the cornet, and he handed it to Armstrong and told him that he could work it off. So that was the first instrument Louis Armstrong had. He was actually proudly spoke, Louis Armstrong proudly spoke fluent Yiddish, loved matzah, and had metzua, and wore a Star of David around his neck, which was given him for good luck by another Jew who played a significant part in Armstrong's life, his manager, Joe Glasser. Now, I'll point you the link on this whole article. You can read it. And basically grew up in a Jewish family when he was 7 years old. And actually, I want to point out a couple more things about this. So he worked, this is right off of Wikipedia, basically, public information. He worked for a Lithuanian Jewish immigrant family, the Karnofskys, who had a junk hauling business and gave him odd jobs. It was actually a junk hauling business and coal hauling business. They took him in and treated him as a family member, knowing he lived without a father, and they would feed him and nurture him. They later wrote he later wrote a memoir of his relationship with the Karnofskys titled Louis Armstrong plus the Jewish Family in New Orleans, Louisiana, the year of 1907. In it, he describes his discovery that this family was also subject to discrimination by other white folks, nationalities who felt they were better than the Jewish race. He said he was only 7 years old, but he could easily see the ungodly treatment that the white folks were handling the poor Jewish family whom I worked for. Armstrong wore a Star of David pennant for the rest of his life and wrote about what he learned from them, how to live, real life, and determination. And he worked very hard at his trade. So, there's a lot of interesting stories about his entire life, too. I'll point you the link on the Wikipedia page, too, and you can look it up. But it's about a man who actually made it against all odds. But, if it wasn't for this Jewish family that took him in at a young age, he probably would have had a very different path. And he actually sang a lot of songs with him, a lot of Russian Jewish songs. And, it started out his music career basically when he was 7 years old. So the influence of the Karnofsky is remembered in New Orleans by the Karnofsky Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to accepting donated musical instruments to put them in the hands of an eager child who could not otherwise take part in a wonderful learning experience. So that's about Louis Armstrong. And basically, here's some more of the footnotes in that article. It says, I had a long time, this is Louis Armstrong speaking, I had a long time admiration for the Jewish people, especially with their long time of courage, taking so much abuse for so long. I was only 7 years old, but I could see the ungodly treatment that the white folks were handing the poor Jewish family that I worked for. It dawned on me how drastically, even my race, the Negroes, the way I saw it, they were having a little better break than the Jewish people with jobs plenty around. Of course, we can all understand all the situations and handicaps that was going on, but just during the Great Depression. Actually, during the Great Depression in New Orleans, the Cotton Club closed up in 1936, and a lot of talented musicians had to go take other menial jobs because there was no support for the music trade. And Louis Armstrong was fairly lucky, I guess, in some ways. He had to work very, very, very hard. These people were not wealthy people that took him in. They were poor people. And just be thankful for a lot of things that happen in the United States that are, we have it a lot better in other countries. And, we take a lot of our freedoms for granted. I can actually point out this, this may be unrelated, but, this is actually something going on right now here in August 1st of 2014 in Turkey. The Turkish Deputy Prime Minister says women should not laugh in public. Talk about freedoms in other countries, and actually it's probably more free country than some other places. But, we are so critical of our country, and we don't realize all the good things that we have until they're gone. But here's a man that made it against incredible odds. And if it wasn't for, I guess some of the nurturing from a poor Jewish family at a very young age, when Armstrong was actually taken in by him, Louis Armstrong was taken in by him at 7 years old, he probably wouldn't have got these opportunities. But if you get those opportunities, you just got to work your ass off, and that's just the name of the game in life. So Louis, he remembered it, and he always wore a Star of David for his entire life. So I think that's quite an interesting story.